Welcome to Teching It Up with Mark, and today we're going to go over 5 best practices for working with Nintex Automation K2 SmartForms. And since this is YouTube, we have a bonus one at the end. So I hope you enjoy. The first best practice I would like to show is using a debug table in the form. So for example, if I have this HR request form and I have in Designer this data label task name, so when the task is changed or when this data label is changed, I want certain rules to execute. And I'm debugging the form and I don't know what that value is. I could always go through with developer tools and find that, but it could be quite a lot of work sometimes trying to find out where this is in the HTML, clicking around, looking through the elements. The preferred way to do this is to add a debug table. So where I have done this before, I just add in the URL query string parameters the and sign, debug equals true, whatever I put for the parameter name. And then there I see this table appear where I have the variable name and the value. So let's go ahead and implement this. If I look at the same best practices form, so I copy the same form just to go through these best practices, what I'll first do is add a table. Could probably add some color to it if we wanted to make it more obvious. So I added that table. I'm going to the top right, name it table debug. I'm going to uncheck visible here. We'll add some style to this. So we'll say borders, this beautiful red. Okay. And then what we're going to do, the important thing is we're going to move our variables that are just floating around somewhere in the form. So here we only have one into this table. So this will hold a variable and then we're just going to put a label in also. So we'll call this label, task name. Task name will be the actual text. I could add some additional information in this third column if I wanted. The point is just that we're being organized and making it easier to debug. So now that we have this table, we see that it's not visible. We're going to do 2 more things. First, we're going to add a parameter. I've already done that here. And I called it the name debug and the type text. You could probably make this Boolean if you wanted to. It's not a big difference. And then I'm going to go to the rules, and on my initializing rule, I'm going to add at the end here a rule for when a parameter, a form parameter has been specified. Select our debug, and has a specific value. Sorry about that. When debug has specific value of true, then search for show here. Show a form control. Table debug. Click OK. Alright, save that, and now it will function as this. So if I have anything else for debug, of course it's not going to show. But this helps save a lot of time with troubleshooting. Even though you can go through the form HTML, it takes a lot of time to do this. We want this as quick as possible. And we could also enable the same thing on the view level too. So here you can see that I added this along with a rule here that I could test individually on the view itself. So that's our first best practice. Our second best practice is going to be something not to do. And this is to not use form states. So here I am again in my best practice examples form. If I go to the rules, you can see I can add a state here. And we'll say test state. And what we're actually doing when we're adding the state is we're actually copying all the rules and able to inherit from that, almost like a view inside a view. And then we can change these rules. So we'll say something here, just add a message. And we'll say info, you are in state. And let's see, can we find this somewhere? I'm not sure about that. Doesn't seem like it, but we can hard code it too. Test. Make sure this is out of this. And now we can see that we have a rule that we change here within the state, a little plus. But note here that we could also change the rules that were inherited in the views, either in the base state or in the test state. Now, the problem with this is first, there's a whole copy of the form made for each state internally. So it extends the, let's see, how do we switch states? Makes things a lot heavier in the background. We could actually look at that with the request. And it also just makes things a lot more confusing for debugging. So if I go back to my state name, test state here, this will take us to the test state. And the rules change, which looks fine for a simple form, but once again, once you have many views in there that are inheriting rules, it's enough complexity already. You want to try to keep it as simple as possible. Therefore, although it's in some of the training materials published by Nintex, we still try to avoid states as much as possible. So I'm just going to remove this, keep everything at the base state, and then we'll move on to our next best practice. Okay. The third best practice is our answer to states and how we would go around that. But that will be using generic method names or generic methods within each view or form. So if I go to my simple item view, and as a reminder, an item view is just loading one single item from a list or one row in a database, I could see here that I have on my create button, looking at the rule, just the create method here. Just two rules when I initialize and create. What I would like to do here is add some unbound rules to actually create or update. This way I can use this in multiple ways on different forms or within the same form as needed, and always kind of know what's happening or call the rules by themselves. So I'm going to say here for the rule name, create or update. Let's make sure we have first a parameter. We have a parameter of request ID that we're going to use as input. And then we'll go back to creating the rule at create or update. We'll go to the conditions, search for parameter again. If a view parameter has been specified, so if this has a request ID, in that case we want to update, so we'll execute a method on the view, update, and we'll just auto map this. I think it will be okay. And we'll go back to the conditions, search for else. Else, if there's no request, that means we need to create one, so we'll go use the create method, configure, we'll auto map this again, and make sure we have the output mappings of the request ID, and we'll put that into request ID so we know either to update the current request or create a new one if needed. So we usually have one for creating or updating. I'll add an additional one for load data. We'll say load data. Load, go to actions. I'll add a parameter, make sure there's something there to load. If a view parameter request ID has been specified, then we'll execute the read method. We'll put in that request ID, the parameter, and the output mapping. We'll auto map to get that. Now we'll go to our initialize method, and instead of using the read directly here, we'll use rule, execute another rule, and that will be our load method. We will also do the same for the create button. So instead of calling the rule directly, we will call our unbound rule. Now the other unbound rule that we usually have is read only. read only. And here we'll, let's see, specify the edit state for view controls. I think is the easiest way to do this, but we could do this in several ways and switch everything to read only here. We could do this on the form level itself, but it's also nice when the views can control this in case there's anything special we want to change or do something additional there, like hiding inputs or explanations, things like that. So I'll save that, and that's our best practice. Our next best practice is asynchronously loading data where possible. So here, if I have a view with a drop-down list of all users in the system, here I only have 4 users or 6 users, so it's not, wouldn't delay things. Of course, we wouldn't recommend a drop-down list of all the users in the system. There's more efficient ways to do this, but you could see the 2 calls here happening one after another. Not so easy to see in this view actually, but you can trust me on this one. It's waiting for the first call to finish before we go into the second call to load the item, such as the administrator, the one for this particular request. So if I go back to the view, what I would like to do here, and this is most useful for these type of methods, is take my populate rule for the drop-down list control, and instead of making this then, I can make this asynchronous. So what that will do in rule execution is, instead of waiting for this rule to finish before loading the next the request ID or going on to the next rule, it will just fire this rule off and forget about it. Just wait for it to come back when it's coming back. So we want to do this wherever we're loading a lot of data. So here, let's see, we have a form loading time, probably somewhere. All right, to request 623 milliseconds. We'll see if this makes a big difference here. Oh, looks like it actually did longer. So you're not going to notice a big performance gain here, but if this view's within a form with several views, when several things are loading, you will notice a big difference. This is the #1 thing I see that to improve performance. So you definitely want to incorporate this and get in the habit of adding asynchronous rules wherever possible, especially for loading data. Just a note on that. It doesn't matter for transfer data and things like that and view changes. So anything that's occurring within the form, the HTML, it doesn't really make a difference if it's asynchronous or not. I don't think it makes any difference. The only time where you really want to note for this is loading data, so calls to the server to fetch more data. Our next best practice is to be organized. Now there's several ways you can be organized, and you should be organized in every way. So this seems obvious, but it's really easy not to do when you're developing fast with SmartForms. But the first way you want to do that is start with a nice folder structure. So I have the project name here, I have my forms, and I have some views in there, so I was not organized myself. The views and the smart objects. We don't want a bunch of views in the smart objects, and although this is not absolutely critical, it helps other people understand what's going on in your project. Delete your backups. Don't keep backups and backups and backups of forms and views. Try to keep that very limited. So that's for the artifacts, where to put them. Next, within the form itself, we want to make sure that we have nice control names. So what they come out as when you drag them on, such as data label, is okay. I just add whatever that is afterwards, and this is to easily identify them in rules afterwards. So nice control name. I don't like using DL or shortcut names. It doesn't matter too much, but still, I think it's a little bit easier to read when the full label is there. We don't want rules like this. The final place you can be organized to is to add comments to your rules. So within the rule itself, when I use this, I have some place to add a comment. This will change things. And when you add a comment too, you could either, let's see, do I see it when scrolling over? Yes, I see it when scrolling over, so that can sometimes save me a click. This is especially useful for maybe a control that will act on different behaviors. So if I have this one here, I could see the options, but if there was several things there, or if this was going off a key, not IT training, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that, then it would be nice to know what those are. The next best practice is editing list items not in an editable list. So I have an editable list here of HR requests, and this was one that was auto-generated by the system. I can double click and I can edit things here, but we run into some issues here. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to edit. Sometimes the user will leave this open. Sometimes they might not click save, or sometimes their changes might not be reflected immediately in the list. So there could be some confusion there. So what we would do in this case instead is we would go into the view and we would change this view type. So not make this list editing, or not create it like that in the first place. We'll lose some buttons here, or these buttons won't do anything. And then first we'll make an unbound rule, and we'll call it open subview. Where we open a subview. This could be a subform too. You might want to do that to keep the same style. And here we'll go into our HR request, and we'll use our item view that we had before. We'll actually use the one that we were just working with now, and pass in the parameter there. So add edit item, we'll call it. And the input mappings we'll take from this list view. This would be the currently selected one, if there is one selected. Request ID. Oh, that's actually the responses too, but we'll put that in. All right, and that's just a rule by itself, but we don't know where we'll want to open this up from, so that's why we put it in an unbound rule. And we'll actually add another rule. View events, when the view executes a method. Here in list views, we have a few extra methods, and I'm going to say list item double click. And then I'm going to go to my rule, execute another rule, and that will be open subview. So if I save that, if I go back here, if I double click on an item, you can see that it opens up the subview for editing, and which makes a lot of more sense. I would add another save button here that's being hidden there, and then I would go back and I wouldn't have to refresh this list. Then I don't have to worry about saving on the list view itself. I could do that in each individual item. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me anything I can improve, anything for suggestions for further videos, and have a good day.